This is Irma Francis, and I'm joined this evening by Ernie Vecchio, author, psychologist, speaker, and spiritual teacher. And we have an exciting show tonight. I'm really excited to talk to Ernie about this and have Ernie explain to you what intentional guided evolution is. So welcome, Ernie. How are you?
Hey, Irma, it's great to be here, and thank you so much. I'm excited with you.
Yeah, I was going over a lot of material today, some material that you sent personally to me, and it's so rich in information and helpful tools. So I thought it would be nice tonight to just start out by explaining what intentional guided evolution is.
Well, it actually came out of, if anybody's been to my website, it came out of me working with severe trauma. So it's kind of what I call a philosophy of intentionally growing on purpose. So it's evolving on purpose. And how I came up with the language for it in the Gift of Compassionate piece that is kind of aligned with intentional guided evolution is that in working with my patients, they were kind of undergoing amputation and paralysis and all different kinds of traumas, that there was something inside of them that was pulling them into the present in spite of their ego's resistance to it. And so I spent a career trying to understand what is this intelligence, what was this intelligence, and try to find a language for it and a context for it that I could then turn around and give to others. And it's really been a career in its development, and it probably crystallized into its final phase probably a year or so ago. I would say 2012. So it's been 4 years ago, I guess, technically, and that it finally crystallized into a model. And I say that because, part of what we need, Irma, when we do counseling and psychotherapy and coaching and all those things, is we need a context to put people's lives inside of. And what I've come up with is a philosophy and a model of therapy and life coaching that literally meets somebody where they are. and sees them for where they are, and also kind of identifies the obstacles that are preventing them from getting here. In The Soul's Intent, which is another book that I have done, I have a phrase where I say that people think they get here when they're born, but they don't really get here till they choose to arrive. And so arrival is a really strong desire to be present in one's life and present in one's experience, but for some reason we can't seem to get there. People can't seem to get there, and so in working with trauma, I had individuals that were having wake up experiences because of the trauma, and so I asked the question years ago: do we have to lose our legs and our spinal cords literally to be awakened? And I discovered, because of personality and because of ego and because of the personal and collective ego, the answer is yeah, we kind of do have to be hit in between the eyes with something to wake up. And so most of us use the culmination of a lifetime of adversity and experiences to awaken, but not all of us are in tune with how that adversity is working inside of us and bringing us here. If all that makes sense. I know it makes sense. I know it makes sense to you, and I've said it so many times. I say it differently every time I say it differently. But so that's really kind of how it kind of got into my psyche, if you will, and then I just kind of have buffed and polished the concepts and the language and the terminology and the context for it over an entire career, really.
Right. And what you saw in all of those patients that were experiencing trauma, you saw kind of a thread going through each patient, and that thread was consistent within each person, and it didn't change. So you saw a pattern kind of manifest before you, and from that you developed intentional guided evolution, right?
Yes. Well, I think what came out of that was the Gifts of Compassionate idea, and because one of the things that I discovered, there were two major distortions that really kind of came out of my working with patients, and I think it's important to say to the listeners that it wasn't just a couple people; it was 10,000 patients.
Right.
My hospital had 250 beds, and it turned over every 14 months. And I worked in that hospital for 30 years. So if you do the math, that's 10,000 patients, 10,000 lives that I was touching, and 10,000 lives that were touching me. I need to say that, but there were two major distortions that came out very, very quickly. You were talking about continuity and a common thread. One is that somewhere along the way, and I've kind of earmarked 1980 is the time that this happened. Somewhere along the way in the culture, we removed the heart as the compass, and we made the ego the default compass. And then once the ego became the default compass, we started having high incidence of undetected, undiagnosed disorder in people's personality and their development, and so that was a huge distortion to make the ego the default compass. The second distortion was how we define the word compassion, and what I discovered is that many of us consider it martyrdom and sacrifice, and so we consider it to suffer for another human being or to suffer for ourselves. Well, that is the definition of a victim, to suffer for oneself. The true definition of compassion is to suffer with oneself and with another human being. So it's empathy and sympathy and understanding. So those two distortions kind of came out very quickly in my work, and I thought, wow, how do I talk about this? How do I reinstall the heart is the true compass? And so I broke it down into four human qualities, and so it's. What's cool about what I'm doing, I think, is I'm talking about the human condition, and so it crosses all religion, it crosses all spiritual teachings. It is the human experience, and that is that we have a soul, we have a spirit, we have an ego, and we have a heart. And so what I have been spent a career doing is trying to figure out how to teach people how these qualities are communicating with us and with one another, and I discovered that it ends up becoming a internal GPS. That when all four of those functions are communicating, instead of being in opposition to one another, because they have a symbiotic relationship, meaning that they all want to work together to arrive to a place of presence, but we are, because of the culture and because of our backgrounds and our histories and our stories, we tend to be in opposing positions with those four qualities. And so, and of course, I define soul as non-local intelligence. That's what science calls it. Never off, never gone, never away. And it is the above observer. It orchestrates our lives for us to see what we need to see. And the human spirit is your feeling reaction to the immediate moment versus an emotional reaction, which is a reenactment of a previous experience, which is a memory. And the ego is an adaptive quality, and the heart, of course, is the true human compass. And so how those four qualities interact with one another is really how we got off the track of what it means to be human and what is normal versus what is abnormal.
Yeah.
And I know that's a mouthful.
It is, but that's so wonderful. I mean, eventually, and I've learned this over this time that I've been listening to you and now getting to know you on a personal basis, that you really have to tune in and pay close attention. But once you start listening to your teachings, Ernie, everything starts to make sense. And that's interesting that you mentioned about the GPS, because there was one show you did, and don't remember the title of the show, but you were talking about the human positioning system. And that show was so full of great information. I pretty much typed up the whole show because I wanted to remember. I just really wanted to get everything that you were saying. And see, one thing I have down here: the soul sees everything before it happens. Spirit is the motivator, ego the adaptive function, and the heart shows the way. The spirit is a motivator if you are awake. If you are asleep, it's a provocator. I thought that was huge to get. Yeah,
because we don't, when we talk about, and you know this, Irma, because we've talked about it a lot off the air, that the trouble with words like soul and spirit is that we keep it in a religious context, and it really takes you down a cul-de-sac. It serves a purpose, I think, in the beginning for it to come from a religious teaching, but at some point it takes you down a dead-end street, because it doesn't really teach you how to communicate and interact with and benefit really from your soul and your spirit, because they're not some unattainable quality that only divine characters have. Every human being has these characters, or these characteristics, and so it's how do I communicate with this, or how do I know that it's communicating to me, and what is it saying, and why is it saying what it's saying, and et cetera, et cetera. So it really gives kind of credence to your inner voice, or I should say voices, because there really are more than a couple of voices that we are constantly hearing in our heads. And then the other piece of that is that we also have an orchestrator of those voices, and we have an above observer and a quality that is watching the conversation. So, part of what happens in this work is that you learn and begin to see what the observer sees. And then you graduate over time to realizing that is who you are, the observer and the witness. And of course, this is what all the other teachers are talking about in this business of the power of now, or being in the now and being in the present moment. Well, again, it sounds like that it's only for the select few people, this business of presence and this business of being in the now. because they don't realize that the soul is never any other place but the now. and so if you really understood that, if you understood that the soul can't be anywhere else but here in this moment, and it doesn't want to be anywhere else, that's part of what I mean when I say that you don't get here till you choose to arrive. Well, that's the soul's intent, is for you to get here. And so it's going to orchestrate your external life for you to see what is happening internally. Your outside life is nothing but a reflection of what's going on the inside. But the mistake we make, of course, is that if we can get the outside world lined the way we want it, right house, right relationship, right job, right location, if we get all these things in order, then somehow we'll find peace internally when really the incongruence or the congruence has to be inside first.
Well,
and then the outside world.
Yeah, and we're we're going at it backwards. in a way, we're going at it backwards. Yeah.
Well, and that's the other trick, that's the other trick of knowing how the ego works. The ego naturally only sees life two-dimensionally. It doesn't see life in three-dimensional time. It only sees, it worries about the past and it frets over the future. It can't be in this moment, the human ego, until it is awakened. And so its natural instinct is to defend itself. And so to realize that that these qualities are not by design supposed to be in opposition to one another. In fact, by design, they're supposed to be symbiotically working together. But because we're asleep to the effect, and because we're asleep to the conversation that is occurring inside of us, we don't really know how to frame it, how to reference it, and then how to apply it to our everyday life. I mean, that's the challenge. It's not as difficult as it sounds. I told you before, I've taught these concepts, and I've taught this philosophy and these perceptions to people with IQs as low as 50 and 60. So you don't have to be brilliant to get this. All you have to do is be awake to get it, really.
Yeah, and it becomes very, very clear. The more I've listened to your teachings, it just brings clarity, and I like this terminology because I think it's true. What it did for me, it did create context for me, and it did give me tools to get traction in my life. I think until you have all of this lined up with clarity within yourself, it's very hard to get traction. And what I mean by traction is moving in the direction that fits your authentic self. So it's like you're not working against yourself, you're working with yourself. And that's the beauty of the work that you offer.
But you're moving you're moving in the direction that the heart is pointing. Which is what and which the soul was orchestrating. So the soul's orchestrating and the heart's pointing the way. And so like the ego struggles with what's right or wrong, and the heart struggles with what's true and false. And so you can see there's a big difference, because right or wrong is in the eye of the beholder, where true and false is just simply true or false. It isn't information; it's a place. And when you're there, because you sense that something's just not right about it, or just not true about it. There's
something I just have to read because I just thought it was so beautiful. These are your words that came from one of your shows. When you try to see the world beyond two-dimensional, black and white, it means that you are trying to see the world beyond the ego. So you are trying to see the world three-dimensionally. But the ego can't do that. Only the soul and heart can see the world three-dimensionally. The soul has no lack. So healing is not about fixing the soul. It's about allowing the soul to shine through, seeing and experiencing life through the soul rather than the ego.
Yes, absolutely.
That's so beautiful. I mean, to me, that's the true waking up. That, when you move out of that two-dimensional, that black and white way of seeing the world, and it kind of when that shift happens, just all this space kind of just shows up into your experience, and it was there all along. But as long as the ego is driving, you don't get those experiences of that space and freedom and love and truth that comes from the soul. And there's a relaxing. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, and what's profound about it is that we first of all have to know where the ego resides. Well, if I ask you to point on your body where the human ego is, most people would point to their head because it's coming from their thoughts and their memories and their experiences that they filed away. But where in the head? Well, it's very specific to the left hemisphere of the brain. And so the ego resides it resides in the left side of the brain, and what's significant about that is that the left side of the brain only thinks in linear fashion. So it only sees how to get from point A to point B. And it's a linear thought. And so if you could, the example I give people all the time is if you held a camera up to your face and you were looking through the viewfinder of the camera, the viewfinder is what the left hemisphere sees, only what's in the viewfinder. If you back the camera away from your face, the right side of the brain sees everything that the camera doesn't take in, and that would be context. And so context is very important to get. So what I'm trying to get people to understand is that your goal as a human being is to become whole-brained in a left brain culture, because we're all in the left side of the brain. All the philosophies on the planet that are right hemisphere are the Eastern philosophies. And those are all the non-egoic ones. Well, look what the internet has done. The internet has merged the planet into one big brain, and so it's very, very important that we're merging the left hemisphere of the planet and the right hemisphere of the planet to become a whole planet. It's no different in the brain itself. That the brain is trying to get you to. The brain's not trying to get you, I should say the soul was trying to get you to use the whole of your brain. How many years have you heard that we only use a small portion of our brain? How many times have you heard that in your lifetime? I've heard that all kinds of times. Well, people never realized that the small portion they were referring to was the left side of the brain. Again,
we're coming at it backwards.
Well, so that inversion that's what you have to learn about the ego. Since the ego only sees things two-dimensionally, you have to then stop and ask yourself, okay, I see how the ego sees it. Now, what would be a three-dimensional way to look at this? And so you have to invert it, and that inversion ends up becoming a practice. It's almost like it's almost like saying, I know what I think, but now what do I feel? And I know what I believe. Now, what do I know? Yeah. I know what I think I'm seeing, but what is really happening? You can see how you're going in those questions from the left to the right, back and forth until you get the whole thing, and that's the point. What's that old song by the Eagles? There's three sides to the story. There's yours and mine and the cold hard truth. Well, that's why the truth really is a dimension, because when you merge the hemispheres of the brain, when you merge what you believe with what you know, when you merge what is happening with what you are experiencing internally, when you merge these opposites, you end up living and standing and doing your life in three-dimensional space. There's no way you can escape it. Once you're there, you can't escape it. It's like once you see what you see, you can't unsee it. And that's key. That's very key. And then, of course, that scares some people because they think that, well, then they got to step up and take responsibility for their lives at a level that they haven't before. And I think that's your work. The adulthood to soulhood work is soulhood work is. And I don't know. I'm going to say this on the air because I sent you an email over the weekend about adolescence. That I find it very curious that our generation was the first generation of teenagers, and I'm talking about the baby boomers, and 75 million of us. And people have forgotten that before that generation of people, we were called adolescents, which implied that we had some growing up to do. That's what it means when somebody calls you an adolescent. It implies that you have some growing up to do, and the growing up is and the growing up is adulthood.
Yeah.
And then the next
Yeah.
stage, and then the next stage is soulhood.
Yeah.
And so what I find kind of curious is that the pendulum has swung back the other way. The boomers have grown up and they're adults. Now, how many of them are actually have accomplished adulthood and soulhood, is up for debate. But we certainly have 2 or 3 generations of people that are stuck in adolescence, and we have a culture that is now swung back to an adolescent kind of mindset. And the problem with us as a culture being adolescent again is we've got nobody to follow. There's no mentor, there's no guide, there's nobody out there in front saying it's this way. Except for religion, of course, except for religion. And religion, again, can get you halfway there, but it ends up becoming a cul-de-sac. You learn the fundamentals in religion, but you've got to move from believing to knowing to be the best version of yourself possible. Because otherwise, if you're just a believing animal and you go to your grave a believing animal, you've not actualized your potential of knowing. And knowing is within everybody's capacity, and it's so far beyond believing because it's tied to experience and it's tied to wisdom that typically comes out of your suffering. So that and you can see the sequence there that the more you move to knowing, the more meaningful your life is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It just all of a sudden,
That's just so true, Ernie. And in that knowing, and as I'm speaking, I'm not saying I've arrived somewhere and I have no work to be done. That's not true for me at all. No. But I do have glimpses and moments of being in that place of pure experience and knowing, and reaching that place of knowing. That's such a great clarification, moving from believing to knowing, because it's in that knowing where you do get to experience that peace that passes all understanding. I mean, you're not in that believing, you're not in that monkey mind, you're in that place of knowing, and that brings such great peace. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to arrive at a place in your life where you have great riches and all the material things you want. To me, there is no monetary worth to knowing. There's no amount of money that can equal that knowingness and that peacefulness and having those glimpses of love, truth, and freedom. That is the gift. It's not in money or material things.
That's why we call it present. It is a gift.
Present. Yes, that's true.
The capacity to be here now is a present.
Yes.
It is a gift, and it is unique, and it is unique to human beings. We are the only species on the planet that can actually observe ourselves. That's what that means.
Right.
And observe ourselves do what? Observe ourselves do the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
The question is, which one do we have any control over? Well, you can't change the past, and you can't, and you can predict the future, but the only thing you really have any control over is the moment you're in. That's it. And so, the interesting part about it to me is that the clarity of moving to knowing, from believing to knowing, is once you get to a place of knowing, your need or neediness deflates.
Yeah.
So, in other words, so you find out somehow your needs are being met without the angst and without the stress. Somehow your desires, your wishes, and your dreams are possible just because you don't have the angst. Because remember, fear, which is considered to be the demon here, is really a motivator. It is there to move us to the next level. And people forget that fear happens in the body and in the human condition to warn us of impending danger. So it is a motivator to prepare us for the possibility of threat. And where we've gotten to in the culture now is we've lost the capacity to tell the difference between what's real and what's made up. And we got so much real craziness happening in the world that it's hard to know that. So that's why your own internal universe is where you have to kind of go to fix those fears. You're not going to look at the newspaper or watch the news and get any sense of peace. And I wanted to say when you were talking about that that it's a sensation piece. It's not a thought. Love is a sensation, not a thought. Truth is a sensation, not a thought. And so when you get to a place of knowing, those sensations are possible. Now it's very difficult to hang on to any sensation that you have because it's fleeting and it's passing. But as soon as you have just a couple and you begin to realize that those sensations are possible, life looks different. That's when I say the blues are blue and the greens are greener. I mean, life just changes when you begin to have a sensation that, you know what, I'm okay. I'm all right. This is okay. I'm going to be okay. This is where you go with that. The sensation of being secure in your own skin comes with a degree of relief and relaxation that is only possible in presence. It's only possible in presence. You're not going to get it anyplace else.
Yeah, it's like waking up to knowing, and I don't mean this in a arrogant kind of way, but knowing that you are the center of your universe. Like you're the center. There's peace in that. It's an unshakable thing. There's no more trying to find yourself in the external, and so you can just live your life in a place of fullness.
Well, we have words for this. Yeah. But what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But if you can get there, you're going to be doing that in a world where a lot of people are still having the ego in the driver's seat, and that I don't mean that in a judgmental way. It's just the way the world is right now.
Well, how about if we said you're still going to be in a world where somebody is being born and being burned in kind of effigy. Look what happened over in this Easter with Trump's. They had a what would you call it? I guess a statue or a dummy made that was supposed to be him, and they set him on fire. You're still going to be in the world. You're still going to be in a world where ego dominates the culture, and that's what you have to contend with is that you cannot change the collective ego, but you certainly can change the personal ego. And what ends up happening is you end up kind of affecting the world that is the circumference of your world, your family, your friends, your community. It has that kind of a ripple effect. As you get to a better place, it begins to affect other people around you. And so you have to kind of keep your expectations of it. But I was also thinking as you were talking about centeredness and the language problem that we have, we actually have words for what you just described in developmental psychology. We move from dependency to independence, and that happens from about 6-7 years of age up to about 16, 17, 18 years of age. We're beginning to move towards a state of independence, and then from I guess adolescence and through young adult up into our late 20s, maybe early 30s. We should be graduating from independence to a place of autonomy, and then by the time we hit midlife, we should be autonomous, which means that we are we're not needy anymore. We actually can love better instead of being neediness in our love. We can be much more reciprocal in our relationships rather than parasitical in our relationships, and then what we move to in older years is sovereignty, which is the master of your own universe or your own reality. And so it isn't centeredness like self-centeredness. It's a developmental transition to move from dependency to sovereignty, but most of us never get past independence. In fact, we think if we get to independence, we've arrived, because independence means I can balance a checkbook, I can hold a job, I can maintain a relationship, I can get along with my neighbors, I can take care of responsibilities, I can pay my bills, whatever. And we think we've arrived at independence, and that's it. That's good enough. Not realizing what we really want to be is autonomous and then move into a sovereign place. And that's the soul's intent, is to be sovereign. And really all that means is to just be and be content with what that is and be okay with what that is. And so developmentally we're stuck in the culture back in adolescence. And I think our generation in particularly understood autonomy and sovereignty because we pushed the boundaries on all of these things. And we pushed and we pushed the boundaries in music and arts and science, and you can just see what the boomers have discovered and what they've done. Now, one of the complaints we have, of course, about the boomers is we gave our kids everything they wanted, so they end up being spoiled brats. And so there's an element of truth to that we overprotected and we gave too much to our kids, and we gave positive reinforcement and gave medals and trophies, and we were so fixated on trying to boost self-esteem by just constantly complimenting people that we took away the idea that you got to pay your dues. You have to earn your way in life. You have to be motivated to be better. It's not an entitlement, this business of sovereignty or autonomy, And so somehow we lost that you still got to pay your dues. You still got to walk the path. You still have to put your time in. And so we've got generations of young people that are stuck in this idea that they can come out of college, for example, and get high-paid jobs, or they should be paid more than they're getting, not realizing that it's a process. It's a process of evolution. At least in the external world, in terms of how much success and how far you get. Internally, however, ironically, if you were moving towards autonomy internally, all the external things you desire will happen. This is what The Secret was trying to sell. This is what most spiritual teachers are trying to sell. This is what the empowerment movement's trying to sell, that if you somehow become have an internal life, and you can get a handle on what that is, then all kinds of stuff will just kind of fall into place. It's called synchronicity.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's a valid statement. And you want to go like, duh? Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah, and they sell it to you as if it's a secret. And that's what's so funny, that if you get your inside world congruent with your outside world, synchronicity will happen. Well, duh. What's funny about that is the Mayan culture knew that, and that was centuries ago, thousands of years ago. There's many cultures that have been ahead of us that have known how to achieve synchronicity, and it had a lot to do with being in real time, had a lot to do with being synchronized with real time. Well, that was the Mayans' way of saying be present.
Yeah.
Be present with yourself. Be present with yourself and be present with this experience. Yeah, absolutely. Same language,
but
same point, different language. Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to somehow sense or know the difference between what your true self is and what maybe the world, society, your family have told you should be, and trying to live up to that. So there has to be something within you that, even if it's just a small little bit of space there where you connect with what that true self is. If you don't have that, it would be pretty hard to.
Because all you've done is, if the ego is an adaptive function, then doesn't not stand to reason that at some point you should get to a place of being adapted. or the alternative, do you stay in a constant state of adaptation? In other words, and this is where we are. We think that what we are doing, which is why life is so hard for so many people, is that they think that life is nothing but a constant series of adaptations, when actually life is adaptations till you reach a point of being adapted. And then once you're there, once you get to that adapted place, you are a click away from autonomy. That would be the next step. So you've gone beyond independence now. You now are adapted, and then you move into doing more than just adapting. Now you're creating. Now you're growing, you're proactive in your life in a totally different kind of way. You're not just holding on by your fingernails. I mean, how many times do you ask people how they're doing, and they say, well, it's one day at a time. I had one guy say to me the other day, I'm 6 inches above dirt or something like that, or I mean, people make it sound like that life is an endurance test, and that's only because they're running out of endurance, because all they're doing is adapting and adapting and adapting, and that isn't, unless you're living in a portion of life where life has been hard because of circumstances and environmental conditions and poverty, and that's a different kind of adapting. But if you're living, let's just say middle America to all the way up to everybody else beyond middle America, if you're still just adapting in your life, then my goodness, you're wasting an enormous amount of time just adapting. Because at some point you should get to a place where you can look in the mirror and say, you know what, I've adapted.
Yeah.
And I survived. I survived, and I'm okay. And daggone it, yeah, this sucked. And those first couple of chapters, they were hell. But you know what? I survived that. At some point, you got to get to a place where you got to go, I've adapted. And ironically, we don't get there. I mean, look at the mental health profession. We call it mental health, but yet we treat mental illness. Well, if we're treating mental illness, are we not supposed to be taking you towards mental health? Well, again, I'm going to use a song again. Hotel California, I love that line. You can get in, but you can't get out. The problem with the mental health model is that once you get diagnosed as having a mental illness, nobody's going to give you a stamp and say it's time for you to go. Nobody is going to give you that. And so at some point, what that is saying to you is you have got to take responsibility for your own mental health. And if mental health isn't going to teach you what mental health is, I will. I'll teach you what it is.
Yeah.
Because not only am I in mental health, not only am I in this model that is broken, I know what mental health is, and so many of my peers do not know what it is. If they do know, they don't know how to teach it, and that's the key. That's the key part of this. How do you give it away? It's one thing if you make it sound like it's a mystery or that it's unattainable, or well, it's too late because you have this label. You're never going to get mental health, and that you can see why people don't want to go to psychology and psychiatry. It's one of those sad professions where if you haven't got a problem when you came in the door, you'll have one when you leave. And that's the nature of diagnosis and labels. And not to say that mental illness isn't real, because it is, but there's a bunch of people that are diagnosed as being a lot sicker than they really are, a lot more lost than they really are, a lot more unretrievable than they really are. And so those are the folks I want to talk to, are those folks that have a sense of that. I can't tell you the number of people that will come into me and say, this is my diagnosis. And I'll go, well, what do you think? Well, I think that one's bullshit, and this one is true, and this one's not. And I said, well, wow, at least you've broken down what you believe and what you don't believe, and that's a start, But I like people that say, well, they gave me this diagnosis, but I'm not sure if I believe it. I like those people because I know that those people have a sense that something's not quite right with the diagnosis.
Yeah, and isn't it a lot of times what happens with mental health is, say a person goes to see a psychologist, goes into therapy, isn't a lot of times the goal to help them to cope and to fit into a society that isn't doing so great? I mean, how is that helpful?
Adaptation. It's like somebody that comes in and says, it's like somebody that comes in and says, I'm paranoid, or I've been told that I'm paranoid, and then they look at me, and I had a 24-year-old kid to say this to me about a month ago. You can call me paranoid all you want, but have you seen the news? Have you read the paper? There's a lot to be paranoid about. And so what people don't understand, there's a big difference between paranoia in the world and paranoia inside your own psyche. There's a huge difference between those two, and yes, there's a bunch of things in the world that are pretty scary, and a bunch of things that really are pretty crazy. But you can be an extension of that, or you can decide to be the opposite of that. And then what you don't know is that by making the choice to be the opposite of that, you actually heal the planet. If you participate in it, then you become a part of the problem. If everybody's afraid of being afraid and doesn't really understand what that's doing to them, if it wasn't what's in the paper today, it wouldn't matter. That's the unfortunate part about it, that if you're afraid of being afraid, you can always find something to point your finger at to keep you there. And so what intentional guided evolution is showing you is that there is a way out of this maze that seems to be a mysterious thing. There's a way out of this maze, and it really isn't as complicated as it sounds. It's like I ask people all the time. I first ask them how old they are, and they will tell me. And let's say they say they're 40 years old, and I say, well, I don't know. You tell me. You've been on the planet for 40 years. Do you have any wisdom? And they'll look at me with kind of a blank look for a second, and they go, well, yeah, I think so. And I say, well, do you know where that came from? And invariably, they either draw a blank, or they will say pain. And I will say, yeah, so listen to what you're telling me. You're telling me that every wisdom, all the wisdom that you have 40 years on the planet came from your adversity. Why are you so afraid of it? If you know that wisdom is possible. And it doesn't come from birthday cakes and bubbles. It comes from pain. So what I teach is that you don't have to be afraid of this. You don't have to be afraid of being a human being that undergoes, a bunch of different developmental stages that are absolutely quite normal. What is abnormal is to just stay in that constant state of adapting and think this is as good as it gets. That would be abnormal. Because that is apathy. That would be apathy, and that's a problem, I think, in our country and in our world. We have a lot of apathy. And what apathy does is it just puts you on the couch. You won't do anything if you're apathetic. Yeah.
And because what happens when people are afraid of being afraid, that causes like a contraction, like a density, and when that contraction and that density is happening, the farther and farther you're getting away from soul contact. And to me, without making soul contact, that soul contact is what brings space in. And when you have that, you can then start opening up and expanding, and you're going the opposite way of being afraid, of fear. To me, it's that simple. But I don't know, without a person connecting somehow to that soul experience, how they would have the courage to open up and to not be afraid. How could they?
Because the natural inclination for the ego is to defend itself. If an ego that is afraid is an ego that's going to defend itself. It will first do it with anger, and then it will do it with behavior. So if you stay in a frightened place and you stay in an angry place, which is a defensive place, then you will, in that constant state of defensiveness, you're lost to the real function of fear. Fear is supposed to motivate you. Fear is always behind you. It's never in front of you. And what I mean by that is that when you think of what most of us are afraid of, it's coming from our past. And if you've never resolved the fear of your past, if you never learned how to cope with fear and handle fear and what to do with fear, then when you start having things in the culture that are real and to be afraid of, since you never bothered to learn how to use fear in a constructive way when you were younger, you use it in a destructive way when you get older, and so you're really kind of blinded by fear at that point, and that's what anxiety would be. Anxiety really is fear of fear itself, and panic attack. Fear in a panic attack is the fear of being visible, that everybody can see that you're afraid. That's what a panic attack really is. Fear of transparency. And so I say all the time in existentialism, we say that we have two fears in existential philosophy, and that is the fear of being seen and the fear of never being seen. And of course,
wow.
the fear of being seen, and you can see when you're younger, the fear of being seen would be, that you could see my insecurities and my inadequacies and all those things about myself I don't like. And then when we get older, it's like, geez, I just wish somebody could see me. and so we literally have those two fears to resolve. And that's the function of fear. And it's not there to debilitate us at the level that we make up. And then all of the external stuff that's going on around us is another kind of fear. That, my basic philosophy on that is, Irma, that if you can learn how to use fear in a constructive way in your internal life and understand the source of that fear and where it's coming from and how it was created and what it's done to you, the outside fears are a lot less scary. It doesn't eliminate those outside realities, but what it does do is it makes you much more resilient for the craziness in the world around you.
Yeah. I've heard you.
And resilience, and resilience is important, because if you're not resilient, then you're going to be consumed by the fear.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard you talk sometimes about your having an inner mediator.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what you were just talking about. I mean, if you have that inner mediator, that certainly helps you stay present and know that your job, your responsibility is to go inward and be your personal mediator.
Just listen to those functions. You've got, what I teach is you've got four voices in your head, which is a counselor, a mediator, a critic, and a bully.
Yeah.
Those four voices are all tied to the ego. But in addition to those four voices, you also have the intelligence of the soul, which is an eternal, deliberate intelligence that is tied to the human condition. And then you have the spirit, which is the feeling reaction to the present moment. So now you've got six communications taking place, six characters, if you will, six dynamics that are interacting with one another at any one given time. If you understood the conversation, that was taking place inside of you, you would be amazed at the clarity that comes through.
Well, yeah, and that's what you mean by being the intermediator. It's understanding those communications between those different voices, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Well, it's not just voices; it's four voices and two influences. So if like the soul, like I like the word ambiance. I've said that to you before. The soul sets the tone in the ambiance. The human spirit is the provocator, so it is the electrical charge, if you will. It is the angst. It knows something's just not quite right. Those are both sensations. Ambiance and angst are sensations. So in the midst of those two sensations, you also have the four voices, trying to understand what the sensations are about.
Wow.
isn't that just incredible?
To me, it is incredible. It's so clear to me. It's so clear. If we
I've
could
got
just
this sensation.
get that. Yeah.
If we could. It's kind of like I'm having this sensation. What is that? Or I'm having this angst. What is that? And then you've got four voices that are inside talking about it. What are these sensations? And of course, left to the ego alone, it would be, well, whatever it is, it's negative. Whatever it is, I better defend myself. Whatever it is, you better be afraid. Whatever it is, it's not good news. Whatever it is. And so that it's so debilitating, the ego, because the ego doesn't have a clue. It can't see itself. It can't see its own reflection. And so it doesn't know what the sensation is. It's in the brain. Wow. It isn't in the body. All the ego is a hard drive. It just stores memories, and it stores feelings that combined become emotions. And then the brain creates the chemicals that shoots through our bloodstream as we experience those emotions. And so it's tied. Then it becomes body chemistry, metabolism, brain chemistry. This is what psychiatry treats. Well, you've got this brain chemistry problem, take this pill. But wait a minute, I'm depressed, and taking no time to say, well, why are you depressed? And invariably it's always the same reason. It's loss.
Yeah.
It's grief. It's a grief reaction is what it is. That's why they're depressed. And in the immediate moment, it may be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job. But what it's put him in contact with is the original loss, which is the loss of self, which happens very young. Yeah. And so these emotions have a function, but yet we're giving people pills to not even understand these emotions. Yeah. And again, not to say that mental illness isn't real, because it is. What I'm saying and who I'm speaking to are all the non-mentally ill people. And I'm also speaking to the mentally ill that go, you know what, I don't agree with that diagnosis.
Well, yeah.
I may be a little bit, I'm speaking to those people. Yeah.
What's causing I know there's, chemical imbalances and there's different reasons for mental illness, but could it be part of what's causing mental illness is people being divided within themselves? They
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those qualities that I described, those four voices, those two sensations, that's what is divided. That is the internal division.
Oh my God!
That's the war. That's the war. That's the battle. That's the internal battle that's going on. And so it's
and
there.
And that can cause mental illness, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, what it can cause you is to amplify those 60,000 thoughts. I mean, I love the movie. I love the movie Girl Interrupted, which was one of the first movies that Angelina Jolie ever made. She's leaving the hospital. She was, and I think she was called bipolar, or she had some kind of problem at the mental hospital. She got into the taxi cab, and the guy asked her about her being crazy, and she said, "Well, I learned what crazy is." He goes, "What's that?" She says, "It's you or me amplified." I love that very simple phrase.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Because amplification of what? Amplification of the bully, the critic, the mediator, the counselor, that amplification.
And those are the four voices. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you amplify the bully and you amplify the critic, then you're stuck. And the human spirit will be amplified even more. Because remember, the human spirit is broken because it had to adapt. And so that adaptation is now, it's kind of like the human spirit goes, oh my gosh, I guess I'm going to have to shock you harder. I guess I'm going to have to create a louder angst. I'm going to have to create the sensation. I'm going to give you headaches. I'm going to give you stomach problems. I'm going to give you back pain and shoulder pain. Yeah, this is what will happen. This is what happens with emotions that are not dealt with, and emotions that are amplified by faulty thinking. That's really what this is. So it really is amplification of thought. And it's not counseling thought or mediating thinking. It's critical bully-like thinking. And if you're taking it out on yourself, then you're living with guilt. If you're taking it out on others, you're living with shame. Either way, guilt and shame are the driving engines of these things. Everybody has a little bit of both of those things, guilt and shame. So it's all related, Irma, and you know that.
Yes, and the wonderful thing, for our listeners, since this is so rich, Ernie's work, Ernie's teaching is so rich, that we've decided to do a video series on intentional guided evolution, and that's something we're going to be doing in the near future together. And you'll be able to tune in and watch Ernie as he shares his teachings with you. And so our next couple of shows are going to continue on this topic of intentional guided evolution. And I hope you continue to tune in, because it might be overwhelming for a little while, but eventually everything becomes very, very clear if you listen to Ernie and his teachings, and it can really, really be helpful in your life. So did you want to say anything else before we close tonight, Ernie? This has been such a great show.
Well, thank you, Irma, and it's fun to do this with you, of course. And the thing that I would add to that as well is I'm going to do a wisdom series. I mean, we're going to be doing the videos where you and I are going to be dialoguing about the work, but I'm going to do a wisdom series that is going to give you a layered understanding of how to undergo adversity and how to suffer. This is one of the lacking things. We're never taught how to suffer. So this model teaches you how to do that. There's an ethical way to suffer, not a moral way, because that would be right or wrong way, but an ethical way, which is contextually true for where you are in your lives. And that is exactly what this model gives you, is that understanding, and this philosophy gives you. So, I'm excited about all of it. So thank you, Irma.
Right. Thank you, Ernie. Thank you. And thank you, listeners. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you next week, talk to you next week, and share more of Ernie's work. So have a wonderful evening. Good night, Ernie.
Good night. Good night, everybody. Good night, Irma.